Hi Booktube, Erin here. Hope you're doing very well. Today I'm going to be going through my literary pedigree, my literary family tree with the literary pedigree tag. It's a tag that started out its life over on the Italian side of Booktube, and then David from the channel Polyglot Reading, he makes videos in multiple languages. He saw this and decided to do a version in English and sort of bring it into the English speaking side of BookTube. And he was kind enough to tag me in his version about a month ago. So thank you, David, for the tag. And we're looking back at authors who have shaped us, authors who might consider your bookish relatives in some way. And there are so many authors that I could have included here, but I've done my best to keep it as simple as I can. So to start off, we'll have to talk about my father, an author who has really, I suppose, shaped me as a reader. A lot of what I enjoy now, I can really trace back to the experience of reading this author's books, and that's J.R.R. Tolkien. I think when I opened Lord of the Rings for myself, um, it felt like a big event, and I just loved being in this world. I love mythology and this big sort of epic feel that you can get in so many different kinds of books, whether it's in Homer and other classical works, or in other works of fantasy, or in big baggy 19th century novels. Um, my love for all of those kind of things all really comes back to Tolkien, an engagement with history as well, a reimagining of history. I kind of feel like that's all going back to Tolkien. Um, a care and interest in the natural world and the environment is very much in here. Um, and also, I think the thing that comes up a fair bit, the thing I think about quite a lot, is the maps and the world and the idea of a journey. And I think I recently found that I really enjoy travel writing. And I think part of why I enjoy travel writing is because of this journey and sort of going back to the map of Middle Earth. And as I'm reading, sort of tracing my way through on the map. There's something I love about that, and I sort of see Lord of the Rings, at least partially, as one of the greatest works of imaginative travel writing ever written. And so yeah, this has shaped me in all kinds of way, and I've never really made a dedicated video about my relationship with Tolkien, mainly because I read The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and then nothing else for years. And then recently I reread Lord of the Rings and just saw how much it had shaped me as a reader. And I'd love to go in and read some more Tolkien soon. Then on to my literary mother, someone who I think kind of signalled a renaissance in my reading. I'd been struggling to read a fair bit for many years, particularly as a teenager, and every now and then I'd pick something up. But this is one of the first authors for a long time where I really got excited, and it felt like a completely new direction in my reading. And a lot of what I read now can kind of boil back to getting excited about this author. And it's Sylvia Plath. I think particularly her poetry. So when I was at college doing my A levels, we read Birthday Letters by Ted Hughes, and I very much enjoy the poetry of Ted Hughes as well. But I can remember our teacher brought in a copy of Ariel by Sylvia Plath, and I had a look at it, and I was really intrigued by Plath's poetry, and so I went out and bought a selection of her poems. And I just remember being on the bus. I had like an hour-long bus journey, and just tearing my way through. And she's been just an author I've just I always feel like I can come back to her and get something new from her. She's an author who I love finding out more about her life and reassessing her life, reassessing my relationship to her, and um, I think an author I'll be intrigued by and reading for many years to come. And certainly when it comes to my taste in poetry, a large part of it comes down to her, but also in her taste of what she liked reading and what excited her, whether it's Dostoevsky or uh, Thomas Mann or even J.R.R. Tolkien. I seem to remember her and Ted Hughes were really excited when The Lord of the Rings came out, and it just seemed so different to so much that was being published at the time. So not only as a writer or as a historical figure, but also as a reader, I find a lot to relate to and a lot to consider, I suppose. Then on to some grandparents. We'll stay on the maternal side, and I feel like one thing that I've taken from Sylvia Plath is, her work is renowned for being confessional and very dark. She's also very funny, and there's this sense of um, excess and darkness and brutality, but also being able to take a step back and either analyze things or somehow make it funny. We won't necessarily be seeing the humour too much in this next author, my literary grandmother, but she's someone who I feel like has a through line um, with Sylvia Plath, and I've just always felt this connection with, and it's Emily Brontë, and there's certainly that brutality, that elemental feeling, that almost violence in the writing there. But then at the same time, she can sometimes take a step back at the same time. I just said in the same time twice in the same sentence. But yeah, just a writer that um, that I really love, and one of those writers that I couldn't really imagine not existing. And for some reason, I always feel this connection and a kind of interplay between um, Emily Brontë and Sylvia Plath. And then the next one, a bit of an odd one maybe, but I feel like this is an author that Plath would have really quite enjoyed. And going back to some of the stuff that Plath um, enjoyed reading and found interesting, I think when she was at university, she wrote a paper on The Double by Dostoevsky, and she was really interested in this idea of literary doubles. And that's also a preoccupation of Jorge Luis Borges as well. There are a lot of mirrors and doppelgangers in his books, and also he likes to play with the way that you know fiction and reality are often kind of reflecting each other, and there's often a kind of uncanny. Where's that sentence going? Um, I don't know. He leaves behind this strange, uncanny feeling when he sort of explores the relationship between reality and literature, and sometimes the way in which uh, literature and fantasy and things we make can become sometimes more real and can shape our reality. And that's just a small amount of some of the things that Borges brings up. But certainly, like when I encountered Emily Bronte, and like when I encountered Sylvia Plath, um, I was just feeling this new energy and direction in my reading when I encountered Borges for the first time, which goes for most of these writers. Um, but certainly these four writers are very much touchstones for me, and I can remember when I first encountered them for myself, having heard about them before, and this feeling of just being sort of pulled in to this other person's literary world, and of just can't really not being able to imagine a world without them, I suppose, if I'm making any sense at all there. Onto my paternal grandparents and my paternal grandfather, who I suppose, like J.R.R. Tolkien, is really interested with reassessing history, is really into traveling as well, into walking, into incorporating journeys into his fiction. And that's W.G. Sebald, a very different kind of writer to J.R.R. Tolkien, and yet is a writer who really strikes a very, I don't know, it always feels like he's striking a very intimate chord with me when I read him. There's a very peculiar feeling that I have when I read his books. I most recently read this, Austerlitz. I first encountered him through The Rings of Saturn. And I've also read a book of his called Vertigo, which is quite odd as well. He often mixes travel writing with history, his own life, but he's not going into any details. It's often hard to know whether he's invented this sort of narrator or whether it's really he himself talking. And there's also fictional elements as well. This is probably the most fictional out of all of them. And yet there's still a lot of history and traveling and stuff like that. I just love it, and I'm sort of drawn in to this world that's very much our own world, and yet is so idiosyncratic at the same time. And as I said, even though he's a very different writer to Tolkien, I feel myself being drawn in much the same way as when I was reading Tolkien for the first time. Then on to my literary grandmother. There are some of her books where there are journeys, or people are journeying into the past, I suppose, and re-evaluating their own past, which is something that Sebald does as well. But this author does it a little differently. This is Toni Morrison and Beloved, and often it's a exploration of American Black experience, of the scars, I suppose, and trauma of slavery, and even all of that in itself is really fascinating, really interesting. But I think that the thing that felt the most profound when I was encountering Morrison for the first time was her writing style and her particular way of using ambiguity, I suppose. There are often sort of supernatural elements that aren't explained but are just in there, that gives it this kind of folkloric feel, even though they're, on the whole, generally speaking, they're sort of realist novels on the whole, and yet there's often a little supernatural element to them. But also this ambiguity to just what happens, and I don't want to go into any particular details for particular books. I don't want to necessarily spoil anything, but it's a really interesting balance where it's not that you feel lost as a reader, but she has, I think, that the confidence in herself, in as a writer, but also in confidence in you as a reader, that she's not going to explain everything, and she's just happy to leave it at a certain point. And there's a, I don't know, I find something very satisfying about the way that she deals with ambiguity, and it sort of helped me as I was exploring a lot more, particularly American fiction from the 20th century, and she was kind of my gateway into that. Then we've got some aunts and uncles to deal with. we've got a mad uncle here, and I think mad uncle is the best title for him. I think he must be on my father's side of the family. I can see a lot of family traits, I suppose, a lot of resemblances to Tolkien. But he's, let's see, he loves going on journeys. He loves making connections with history, but often you're not entirely sure how, how genuine, how reliable what he's saying really is, and yet you just enjoy hearing these stories from him, and there's a charisma there that you really love. And that's Patrick Leigh Fermor, an author I discovered for myself just over a year ago. Well, coming up to 2 years ago now. It's crazy how quickly time's gone by. But this was the moment where I sort of discovered just how much I loved travel writing and sort of connected it to Lord of the Rings. I was going to this map that's at the beginning of the book, if I can find it. There's a map of his journey in this book, and I was following along just as I would follow along the map of Middle Earth in Lord of the Rings as I was reading this, and finding it just as enjoyable and just as satisfying, even though this is, it's a work of travel writing, a work of memoir, and it's about Europe in the lead up to World War II. And yet it was just as exciting as Lord of the Rings, and it seems like I just love a journey in a book. Then on to, I suppose this uncle must be on my mother's side of the family. I suppose, like Sylvia Plath, this author can, he's not afraid to bring up quite dark subjects, and yet where Sylvia Plath can be quite funny with it, I think my uncle can be quite ironic with this darkness, and that's Thomas Mann, who probably is my favourite novelist. The Magic Mountain is probably my favourite novel, and this, I think, like Patrick Leigh Fermor, he's one of those people who feels like a natural storyteller. And whereas with Patrick Leigh Fermor, there's a charisma, and it's full of energy and life, and a certain amount of charm. With Thomas Mann, you just feel like you're in very safe hands, and he might tell his story quite slowly and quite laboriously at times. He might be going to some quite intellectual, sort of crazy areas, and some quite dark areas, but he's going to make you laugh, and he's with you every step of the way, so it never feels too intimidating, and you're quite happy just to sit there and see what he has to say. So that's my literary uncle. And then recently I've been scouring the archives, and I've come across a long lost aunt who, it seems like we have a lot of shared interests in poetry, in the way poetry can seem infectious and almost like a kind of incantation, but without seeming too kind of hippie-ish, and it's not pretending to be an incantation, but instead it's just letting the language do its work. But also a concern for the environment as well, and for seeing the threat that in our sort of current moment there is to our world, but also in loving and enjoying what we still have as well. And that's all there in Alphabet by Inga Christensen. And I was just so glad to find this, and just absolutely loved reading it. But it's just the beginning. I've only just found this relative, and I'm hoping to, strike up a correspondence, and maybe I'll be getting to know her a little bit better in the future. And so that's my literary pedigree. That's some authors that have shaped me, some quite a long time ago, some relatively recently. I haven't written down any people that I tagged to do this, and so I'm just going to go off the top of my head. So I would like to tag, let's see, I will tag Debs from Rainer Reads. I will tag James from Quaint and Curious Volumes. I will tag Mark from Book Time with Elvis, John from Must Read More, Dia from Novel Idea, and I think I'll leave it there so I don't forget who I've tagged. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. And if you'd like to share some authors that have meant a lot to you and have shaped your reading life, please feel free to let me know. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.